Good afternoon, I'm Shane Seeley with the CBC News Break. Close to 500 workers of Banks Holdings Limited are off the job. The workers from Pine Hill Dairy, B&B Distribution, Banks Breweries and BBC divisions walked off the job this morning protesting a number of grievances. They have, however, refused to say what the issues are, and we're still waiting on a representative from the Barbados Workers Union up until news time. The action has caught the BHL CEO Richard Cozier completely off guard. He says the group is presently having what he thought was cordial discussions with the BWU. At the heart of those discussions are the negotiation of contracts which have expired and the integration of Banks Breweries and B&B. Regarding the integration process, Mr. Cozier says only 2 unionized members will be made redundant.
I expect with any integration there will be changes and changes within departments, and perhaps changes to persons and their job functions, and some functions may follow. We communicated to the union that such was the case, there were going to be some changes, but the good news was that in the integration process there were some, at the time 3, now only 2 persons whose jobs would be redundant as a result.
Mr. Cozier pointed out that this is the first time such a massive strike has taken place at BHL, and he is very disappointed that it has happened at this time.
It wasn't too long ago I read in the papers about 5,000 or 6,000 people turned up at Sherburn for what would be considered in that context a handful of jobs. And here we have within the Banks Holdings Group, persons with good jobs, well-paid jobs, who are treating their jobs with flippant regard, and putting their jobs at risk for a process or a cause that has not been communicated to us. And that's a personal thing, that's not a BHL thing.
Now, Fridays are normally the busiest days for the group, and today's strike action will cost the company several $100,000. The Minister of Health says Barbados has been preparing since August in the event that a case of Ebola is confirmed here on the island, and John Boyce is confident that the healthcare system can manage to contain any case if it arises. In an address to the nation last night, Mr. Boyce said the island's response is being led by the National Security Council, which is headed by Prime Minister Frendell Stewart. He adds that an Ebola protocol manual is already in place.
That sets out protocols for training, surveillance, screening, infection control, contact tracing, the handling of human remains, and other critical issues that must be addressed. Large-scale training and sensitization of our healthcare workers and administrative staff, as well as our partners from other government sectors, the private sector, and civil society, were also conducted in August.
The health minister says there are adequate supplies of personal protective equipment and more are on order. He says 2 protocols for managing passengers arriving in Barbados have been agreed by Port Health, Immigration and Customs officials.
Persons arriving from affected areas are referred to Port Health, where a public health nurse conducts screening and evaluates the need for further management. In the event that there is a passenger requiring observation, quarantine facilities at both ports of entry are functional, and systems for surveillance by the polyclinic staff are in place.
Mr. Boyce went on to explain that the emergency ambulance service, along with the private sector providers, have agreed on a protocol that includes training in the correct use of PPE, infection control, and decontamination of units. He says planning meetings are continuing at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and polyclinics, and further simulations will be carried out to test the systems, identify responses, and fix any gaps that are discovered. The head of the Barbados Coalition of Service Industries is telling stakeholders in the local services sector to stop withholding data from the Central Bank of Barbados. BCSI Executive Director Lisa Cummins is calling for an end to the practice, saying it's only hurting their chances of acquiring loans or grant funding to improve their operations. She says the data is essential to determine the sector's contribution to the local economy. She's hoping to address the issue at the coalition's annual general meeting on November 19th, which will also be attended by a team from the central bank.
In Barbados, very often we would have meetings here in BCSI. We would have the central bank come in. We've had them come in twice, and we've had them engage with our stakeholders, and they have been very unwilling in the services sector to provide data. One, because they're very afraid of being captured by the tax man. So they're very unwilling. But that has a downside, and the downside is that when the government then is looking at central bank data, and we're talking about here in these kinds of fora, services this, services that, and you are part of the services economy and your data cannot be captured, then it works against you.
Barbadians are being urged by police to do the best they can to protect the elderly and their elderly relatives from scammers looking to clean out their bank accounts, robbing them of their hard-earned savings. Crime Prevention Officer Station Sergeant Stephen Griffith is expressing concern about reports that police have received in this regard. He's calling on the public to be more vigilant about people getting close to their elder family members.
We want family members to pay attention to their elderly ones, especially those people who may in the early onset of dementia or those persons who have Alzheimer's. You must pay attention to your elderly ones because there are going to be those persons out there who are unscrupulous, who are not going to be holding nothing and will go after these persons to access whatever funds that they have accumulated.
News this afternoon that a burst main has disrupted classes at the Christ Church Foundation School, and as a result, it is closing early today. Principal Robert Cumberbatch says they've called the Barbados Water Authority about the problem, and the BWA says the problem cannot be fixed immediately. Mr. Cumberbatch is asking parents to collect their children as soon as possible. He expects that the school should resume on Monday as usual.